As we are well aware, oh, it's being recorded, but okay. As we are well aware, we are sailing on rough waters as we explore answers to our big question for 2022. How can there be peace in today's world? Thank you to Susie Cole, President of the Interfaith Council of Rossmore, to the Big Questions Committee, Ruth Ahern, and Gloria Sunshine and Channing Miller. We much appreciate you, Will McCarthy, for your generous hosting of our big questions and dashing from wherever you were coming from to get here. It's pretty good. And thank you to Channel 28 for recording this for many years now. Channel 28 has produced DVDs, which they send to me. And so we have an archive of about 5 years of big questions. So someday when we figure out what to do with that, that will be good. In times like today, it's crucial to have ideals, kind of a vision, like a polar star. I'd like to share a poem written by a friend, Vern Benham Grimsley, many years ago. The poem is called Family of God. All humankind is one vast family, this world our home. We sleep beneath one roof, the starry sky. We warm ourselves before one hearth, the blazing moon, the blazing sun. Upon one floor of soil we stand and breathe one air and drink one water and walk the night beneath one luminescent moon. The children of one God we are, and brothers and sisters of one blood, and members of one worldwide family of God. Last month, as an answer to our big question, the Sufi speaker suggested that a Department of Peace be created and that manufacture of all weapons be stopped immediately. Our other speaker, Representative Ananda, shared that we can impact each other through our energetic vibrations of love, harmony, and cooperation. Sort of 2 different ways of looking at things, a material and a spiritual way. But towards the murderers of children, how do we maintain an attitude of love rather than hate? Let's listen to the thoughts of our 2 speakers today. One, a representative of Christianity, and the other, a representative of the Urantia community. Reverend Dan Sturtevant graciously stepped in. Thank you, Dan. When our planned speaker, Dr. Ahmad Nazir, had an emergency. Pastor Sturtevant is the pastor for the Tice Valley United Methodist Church here in Rossmore. He was a preacher's grandkid. It's in his genes, evidently. Was born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas, graduated from the University of Colorado in Boulder with a BFA in theater arts and a minor in English. Attended seminar at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley. Before entering the ministry, he spent 10 years in Los Angeles pursuing a living as an actor. He was in a couple of films, a national commercial, and a smattering of appearances on episodic TV. The work he's prouder of came in the theater, including a run with the Colorado Shakespeare Festival. For a Protestant minister, Dan's pastoral preoccupations are even less typical than his background. He's concerned less with theology than with anthropology, the human longing to experience the divine, and the many lengths we'll go to seek it. He figures we're too limited to know much about God. But if we ask the right questions, we might come to know ourselves, as St. Paul says, even as we have been fully known. Dan has pastored United Methodist churches across the East Bay for the last 24 years. Thank you, Reverend Dan Sturtevant, and you are on.
Thank you, Sarah, for that terrific introduction. It sounds like something I would have written. Actually, I think I did write it. Anyway, thank you for that. By the way, before we get going, is there a way that I can get a copy of the recording of this?
I can send it to you. Will records it and
Right.
he sends it to me and I can send it to you. Is that what you mean by a copy?
Well, what I mean, so the last time that I did this, the big questions, you sent me a link and I can certainly go, but I want to, if I can actually have the file recording, it might be helpful.
I don't know
Because
the answer.
if you're using Zoom,
Yes, I
it's
can do
being
that.
recorded.
I can send you a copy.
Okay.
Thank
Put it
you.
in a Dropbox or something like that. Okay.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you, Will.
I believe it's also possible for you to record on your own computer right now.
Right. I'm not, though, in a position to, I'm not going to take time now to figure out how to do that. But let's talk about peace. The way the question was phrased to me, first by Sunshine and then later on by Sarah, is, how is peace possible? Or is peace possible? And so, the first question I need to ask is, what do we mean by peace? Do we mean, and I went to the Oxford English Dictionary and of course gave me tremendous amounts of stuff, but actually a lot of it is helpful. And there are about 9 different definitions of peace. Each of them include the word freedom. Freedom, which I thought is interesting, but it's usually freedom from. So for instance, the lead definition in the Oxford English Dictionary is freedom from or cessation of war or hostilities, a condition of amity and concord with another. There's also freedom from civil commotion and disorder, so public order and security, freedom from disturbance or perturbation, usually related to an individual. You'll say, I need some peace and quiet. You say things like that. There's freedom from quarrels or dissension, freedom from mental or spiritual disturbance. That is a peace I have never known, is freedom from that. Internal conflict, that kind of peace. And it goes on, absence of noise is peace. We talk about peace in that sense. So all of these things are what we mean when we talk about peace, or we talk about peace and we talk about it in these senses. But I don't think that's what this question refers to. I think this question, coming in light of the aggression in the Ukraine, we're talking about war. We're talking about violence and we're talking about cruelty. And how is it possible that we can be free of those things? Well, given that we're human beings, I suppose it's possible, but I don't think it's terribly likely, at least on a global scale. I figure that conflict is kind of built into the way we are. Conflict within our own hearts, conflict. And sometimes conflict is a really, really positive thing. For instance, a marriage that is free of conflict is not necessarily a condition of peace. It's not. You need a certain amount of conflict because it helps us to grow. But that doesn't cover what we're talking about when we talk about violence. So since I only have like about 20 minutes, I want to meditate with you a little bit about what peace can possibly mean for us and how to pursue it. I think of peace in a religious sense. I think of, and I'll talk more about it in a Christian sense in a minute, but I think of the concept of shalom, which is a concept that is more about wholeness and prosperity of heart. I think of salam. I think of the convention within Islam of referring to the prophet. Whenever you say the prophet's name, peace be upon him, you say. And I think that that's also done with other revered figures. You wish peace to be upon them. So in that sense, it's a blessing that is offered, peace. We'll talk about that more in a minute. So it seems to me that the most desirable form of peace that we can productively work for, at least between multiple parties, is not so much a cessation or a cessation of conflict or an absence of discord as work towards reconciliation. It seems to me that the most enduring forms of peace are those that are found when conflict is reconciled. So in that sense, conflict is needed, not necessarily violence, but at least some form of conflict. And I guess where I'm moving to, what I most want to say is that I don't think that we're ever going to be able to have any kind of peace on a global or even, national level if we're trying to do it from the top down. Peace cannot be imposed. In fact, an attempt to impose peace would create nothing but discord, right? Especially here in the United States these days, people would say, well, you're impinging on my civil right, right? My right to do violence or do conflict or whatever. It seems to me that the only way we're going to get anywhere with peace is to think about it in very personal terms. And, it's funny, as some of you all know, although I'm a dedicated Christian, I'm an ordained pastor in a Protestant denomination. I'm nevertheless very critical of Christianity, but I've been surprised at the terrific resources for peace that I have found. And one is a hymn from the United Methodist Hymnal. It's not an old hymn, it's relatively contemporary. And just to set up the rest of my remarks, let me read you the words of this hymn, which is pretty short. It says, "Let there be peace on earth." That's the title. "Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God our Creator, children all are we. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my solemn vow, to take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me." Amen. I mean, it has to begin with me. It can begin with nowhere else. But one thing that I found helpful, something else from the Christian tradition, is a concept of sin. And by sin, I'm usually talking about a verb. And by sin, I'm not talking about it in the way that most of us grew up with if you grew up Christian. I'm not talking about sin as having anything to do with the original corruption that has been passed down to us from Adam's disobedience. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about sin in the form of indulgence, eating some kind of double fudge chocolate cake with ice cream and chocolate sauce. I'm not talking about sex outside of marriage. I'm not talking about it really in a necessarily moral sense. I'm talking about sin, and again, as a verb, as the human tendency to turn away from God and to turn away from our own hearts, from what we know is right. The best definition of sin that I've ever heard is a really contemporary one. In fact, it comes from a 2013 book by Francis Spufford, who's a British author, not a formal theologian or anything. And I believe the book's called Unapologetic. And he's talking about Christianity and his own difficulties with Christianity and his own struggling with it. But he says, sin is the human tendency to mess things up. Only he does not use the word mess. I think he's spot on. We have this tendency to screw up, to mess things up, particularly our relationships with others. Even when our intentions are at their best, we will say things and do things that hurt people's feelings, that they take the wrong way. We experience this all the time. we mess things up. And one of the things that really is as unhelpful where peace is concerned as anything else is the fact that we kind of deny this about ourselves. So we try and cover this up about ourselves. We don't want to admit that we're wrong. To me, understanding that I'm a sinner in this sense, that I'm an imperfect person who tends to be wrong about a lot of things and to mess a lot of things up. Not that I get everything wrong, but just I do have this tendency. This keeps me humble. And this keeps me aware of something that I need as much as anything else, which is forgiveness. And I think it seems to me clear that for any kind of enduring peace, there's going to have to be lots of forgiveness. Forgiveness, we will need to be forgiven, and we will, of course, need to offer forgiveness. Again, the only kind of worthwhile peace that's possible is one that begins with me accepting that I'm a sinner who sins. And in the Christian tradition, we have, it's a very old school convention in our order of worship, but I think it can be really, really helpful, which is we have, and most Protestants don't do this, but I think that old school Episcopal churches and Anglican churches certainly do this. There's a portion of the service where you do, you ask for, where you confess silently your sins. And at least in the Anglican tradition, not the Episcopal tradition, but the Anglican tradition, there's a portion of the service where everybody is to confess their sins. And what you do is you kneel. And kneeling, maybe the one physical practice that if we all engaged in it on a regular basis, might be very helpful for peace. But anyway, you kneel, and then you say together this following prayer. You say, "Most merciful God, we confess that we have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed, by what we have done and by what we have left undone. We have not loved you with our whole heart. We have not loved our neighbors as ourselves. We are truly sorry, and we humbly repent. For the sake of your Son, Jesus Christ, have mercy on us and forgive us, that we may delight in your will and walk in your ways in the glory of your name. Amen." And then there's a moment of silence in which you silently confess where you've messed up. And then at the end of that, you're invited to stand, or the pastor stands and offers absolution and says, "You are forgiven. The grace of our God, you are forgiven." Then what happens, and this is the cool thing, this is the thing that I think is most helpful to think about in terms of peace. Then you pass the peace. You stand and you offer everyone around you peace. Peace be with you and also with you. And the peace that they're talking about is a peace that recognizes whatever other differences I may have from you. You and I we're both sinners who sin, and we all need forgiveness. I offer my forgiveness to you for whatever you've done, and I pray that you offer it to me. And that's peace. That walking around and offering peace to one another, that to me seems, we've got to have that. We've got to seek that as individuals. And if we seek that, hopefully by contact, it will rub off and maybe a movement will form, or it will spread, and peace will spread. A more large-scale anti-violent peace will be possible. And then the last thing I'll say is this. After saying that, I think peace is related in some way to forgiveness. Peace is related in some way to an abiding sense of belonging. So to seek belonging and to do what we can to provide welcome for others in our midst, such that they might find belonging, that's important. But maybe the most important thing is that peace is related in some way to the internal tranquility that comes from the conviction, not simply that I am loved, but that I am needed. I am at peace. Whatever else is going on in my life, if I can simply remember and simply feel the fact that I am loved and that I'm needed, that I have been given life for the purpose of loving and blessing, and that I'm needed. And so with all of those things in mind, with that recognition of all those things being things that I need, I will then do what I can to provide it for you. And I think trying to provide those things for you may be the best way to find that kind of peace for myself. So until we get these things going, until we're able to find that sense of internal peace, I just don't know that any other peace is even conceivable. Nor do I know if it's very desirable. Because as I said at the beginning, conflict is one of the ways we grow. It's one of the ways that the human spirit is stretched. And in the Ukraine, despite the horrors that are occurring there and the unfairnesses and all of it, the spirit of the Ukrainian people has been a tremendous inspiration to us all. And it is one that is seeking to restore peace. So I don't know if peace is possible, but I know if it is, it's through the things that I said. Through seeking forgiveness, giving forgiveness, finding belonging, recognizing I'm a sinner who sins and I need these things. So I guess that's it. For now, that's it.
Thank you, Reverend Dan. Just, true words. I especially found it interesting that your a new definition of a sin for me, because I really, don't talk to me about sin. I'm not a sinner and I don't like the concept of sin. They sin, but I don't. And, to turn away from God and our own hearts, that just makes so much sense. So now, folks, for the next 10 minutes or so, it's your turn to express yourself or to ask Reverend Dan questions. But this is a time of open dialogue. And sometimes it's, kind of hard to begin to hear your voice say something, but this is the time for that. And then we will hear from Marvin. So any thoughts that have come to you, stirred by the world situation, by your own situation, by what Reverend Dan said, just share them. And it's okay to take a minute too of quiet to think about these things.
Just a brief thought, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciated everything that you've shared, Pastor Dan. Very relevant, I think, for all of us, certainly for me. And I'm really looking forward to the open conversation, because you've approached this more from an interior and personal place, and which is hugely relevant. And I'll more approach it from the global and geopolitical sense, and sort of unfolding of the future toward hopefully some utopian end result for our world. We all hope for that. Some time when God is and spirituality prevail in our world and our culture. But there's a huge interaction and relationship between the intimate personal expression of peace and the larger global expression of it. So I so much appreciate your emphasis. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Marvin.
Mm-hmm.
Now, go ahead, Judy.
Just quickly, I wanted to share that I loved every single word you said except sin. Somehow that, to me, did not add to the beautiful say, the beautiful feelings that you had about peace. And it was so fascinating to me that it was the first thing that Sarah said as well. So other than that one word, I had a wonderful time listening to you, but I cannot reconcile sin with the idea of peace.
So thank you, Judy. And I too have struggled my whole life, and usually in a very negative sense, with the whole idea of sin and the way that it's been abused and misappropriated and used to control people and so on and so forth. It is an extraordinarily misunderstood thing. What I was trying to get at, though, is Francis Spufford's idea that, forget the word sin. I am somebody who messes things up. Not always, but I certainly have that tendency. And I am certainly in need of forgiveness. And so leave the word sin out of that. And that's fine with me. In fact, it's probably helpful, because I think as happened with you, it happens with many people. You just say the word sin and it's like, boom, just a wall goes up because of the way that the word has been corrupted. So thank you for saying that. And we can, now that I've covered the topic, we can just throw the word sin out.
Okay, let's see, who had their hand up? There was somebody else.
Bettina and then Marilyn.
Okay, Bettina, thank you. Bettina, go ahead.
Let me get unmuted. I have construction going on. I hope it isn't too loud going on behind me, but a couple of thoughts also about this exchange on the idea of sin. Part of negotiation and reconciliation has to do with the acknowledgement of wrongs done. It is true in South Africa. It'll probably be true in the Ukrainian and Russian situation. All of our efforts for truth in media has to do with exposing errors and wrongs when they happen. And I believe if we avoid the concept of sin, we avoid the acknowledgement of grief and pain that we might have contributed to. And I believe that that is unreality. It will lead us into a place where we cannot reconcile or heal. The Hindus actually embrace, although I'm not Hindu and I don't have a profound understanding of it, but the idea of, I believe it's Kali, or the destroyer, that there are forces in the divine that destroy as well as build.
Yeah.
And it took me decades to come to some sense of my ability to be comfortable with this idea of sin and its need. But I must say, I wholeheartedly agree with you that we really cannot grow spiritually or heal without some sincere acknowledgements of where we've gone wrong.
Yeah. The trouble, I think, is, as Judy brings up, is that the word sin itself has become almost an obstacle to an understanding of the concept that underlies it. And it is the concept that underlies it of human flaw and failing and, et cetera. That's the thing we have to deal with. And gosh, and Bettina, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee that Bishop Desmond Tutu was such a big part of, and may peace be upon him, may he rest in peace, he died recently, is a model of national reconciliation that is so inspiring to me and has happened nowhere else in history that I know of. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's an extraordinary event.
It's also true of the reconciliation efforts Indigenous in Canada, etc. I don't think we'll get anywhere even in the Ukrainian and Russian situation without some kind and form of humility about the wrongs done.
Putin doesn't seem to me necessary, at least at this time, very prone to that sort of thing, but we'll see. We will see.
Thank you.
So
Marilyn,
yeah,
Marilyn, go ahead.
and then Gloria, and then
Good, you're
Annette.
keeping track.
Yeah.
Okay, Marilyn, Gloria, and Annette. Go ahead, Marilyn. You're muted.
Okay, so just to throw another thing into the mix, I grew up Catholic, so sin was a very bad word for me, you know. And then I went to Unity for 25 years. And sin, just as Will had just put in the chat, was missing the mark.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually a archery term. So I was able to use that concept. And then I went to the Lutheran church where I've been for the last 4 years. And they start off with, we are all saints and sinners, which is very much kind of going, you know, there are those triggering words for people and we can choose to use them or not. And, but for me, I've actually felt a freeing with the we're all saints and sinners. There's just the acknowledgement, I'm human, I'm growing, and it's even more so than when I was involved in Unity and we just called it missing the mark. And that confession, we don't do it every time, but I actually really like it when we do. Because of that thing, particularly those things done and not done. And living up to that higher consciousness that I actually think is crucial for peace.
Yes.
You know, I may not be able to come to a place of love for many of the people we would call, quote, bad actors, but God can. And I can say, okay, God, I can't do this right now. I'm not at that level, but through your grace, please let me channel that love, light, and peace.
Thank you. Marvin, I'm going to go on to Annette and get back to you later. And there was one other person who wanted to talk.
It was Gloria first,
Gloria. Okay.
then Annette, and
Okay,
then it looks like Leela also has her hand up.
Sunshine.
I too, we all get caught on that word sin, and I too, like you before me, was brought up Catholic and had a very hard time with the word because I felt I tried so hard and I didn't want to be identified as a sinner. But I too also learned that it was an archery term and it was missing the mark, and I made some peace. And then I joined Ananda because I so really hoped and wanted so hard to be a saint and to try so hard. And it seemed impossible in the Catholic Church, but in Ananda, a saint is a sinner that never stopped trying. And I thought that really embraced me. But you know, the big thing that, as I heard you all speak today, and I thought for the peace of our world, is the essence of humility. I think that anyway, none of us like this word sin. We all react to it. We all don't want to be that. But in some ways, if it just talks about looking at our own wrongdoing sometimes, or missing the mark, or where we haven't quite got to what we need to do, then maybe our society is missing some of this humility that we need for peace. And maybe the world also, because it seems now in this caring about, oh, it's my right to do this and it's my right to do that, and I don't care about you because it's my right, we lose in our humility. And maybe the focus to get peace, to really, is it possible, is only if we get back to humility.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Annette?
Reverend Dan, I really appreciated the way you interpreted this big question, and not in a global military sense, but in an internal personal sense. Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. And that to me is something that we can realistically work toward. We can have an impact in our sort of near sphere of influence. And I greatly appreciated that that's the way you interpreted the question.
There's a wonderful, thank you, Annette. There's a wonderful Buddhist saying that someone who wants to change, wanting to change the world is like wanting to cover it in leather. It's better to begin with the soles of your own feet
That's
or
all right.
your own shoes. And that's great.
That's really good.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
I would refer you guys to Will's comment in the chat
Yeah.
box.
Yeah.
And he talks about missing the mark rather than human failing. But what I'm interested in is we need a new human anthropology. And this is a topic for another big question, but I would say that there is a shifting sense of what a human being is. And this is one of the causes of a great deal of upset and insecurity in this world today, is who and what a human being is, what a man is, what a woman is, what sexuality is, what the purpose of sex is. All of these things are wrapped up in our anthropology, which I think is going through a shift, a needed shift. So
That's interesting because I was thinking the same thing, that we need a new way of looking at who are we. In fact, that occurred to me that might be a big question. So Big Questions Committee, are you hearing this? That might be a good big question for next year. Who are we? Who am I? So write that down, you guys.
I
Okay,
actually
And
want to.
Sarah, it's not just the sin spectrum, but there are other spectrums around ability and disability, about spectrums along the neurodivergent spectrum. There's multiple ways we can pull the strings on that question, not just around innocence and guilt.
That's a great question. Leila, go ahead. Marvin, we'll get to you eventually, but you got a whole 20 minutes. So, I'm going to cut you off for a minute. Go ahead, Leila.
Sarah, thank you. And Dan Sturtevant, I really appreciated your presentation. Thank you so much. And I loved your focus on the individual, because it's so easy to feel hopeless because there's so much happening and there's such a big stage. But I think coming back to the individual, and even in the little things that we do, it doesn't have to be the major thing, by smiling at somebody, being kind to your neighbor. I feel that gives one hope and gives you the ability to act in the world. The second thing I just wanted to say was about South Africa. I was born and raised in South Africa, and I grew up during apartheid. But I left when I was 17 years old because it was such a soul-destroying country to live in. And I just couldn't do it. And I left, and I know independence came in 1994. And of course, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee was extraordinary in preventing the bloodbath that everybody expected in South Africa. We lived with the terror of that happening and destroying the country. However, I feel it was a political accomplishment that bloodbath did not occur. And I've been back many times to South Africa to visit my family and in my work career life. And I still think that the true change, the true transformation has to come at the level of the heart, at the level of the spirit. And I can say to some extent, one sees it in South Africa, and it's a process. I recognize that it is a process, a long-term process for change that was so ingrained. But until that real recognition of our oneness in divine spirit comes about, then we will truly see peace, not only in South Africa, but everywhere else in the world.
Thank you. You come from a Baha'i perspective, don't you, Leila?
Absolutely, absolutely. So that understanding and idea of oneness, which I never understood growing up because I only lived with division and separation. And once I found the Baha'i faith, I said, oh, we're all one. We're all one. And I didn't have to hold that anger in any way, and continue hating South Africa. But now I can say I love the country.
Right. Okay, I'm going to put you off for 1 minute more time, Marvin, because then you're going to be on for 20 minutes. Go ahead, Robert Ish.
I've been looking at sin as error for quite a number of years. And, who of us has not committed an error? It's something we do every day. And I think of sin kind of as a great common humanity that we all share. And in the Urantia tradition, which Marvin's going to be speaking from, they kind of up the levels beyond sin, which you could use as error as a synonym to evil and iniquity. But the point being is what the intention is. And if our intention is not to make sin, to make an error, I don't really think we're held accountable in the traditional angry God viewpoint. My question is, we're talking about the conviction that not only am I loved, but that I am needed. So how do we get that meshes out to the individual who's right there in front of us, that they have agency, that they're important in this big world picture? And that's a question for Dan.
That's a bit. Thank you, Robert, and thanks for the softball question. By the way, so I mean I like what a lot of you all have said, and I think one of the reasons that I have focused on this as a personal, more from a personal perspective, is that it lies within the scope of my own competence. I just can't do a lot about the world situation. I can project and create grand plans, but even those are going to be full of unintended consequences and all kinds of things. But in answer to your question, the best thing that I can do towards helping people to understand that they're needed and that they have their own agency and so forth is treat them that way, and to do it like this. When I come face to face with somebody, to actively look, where is the image of God in them? Where does it shine through? What are the wonderful things that would delight me about you? Were I only able to see them? And to the extent that I am able to treat pretty much everybody that I come across in that way, it is helpful to them. And if we could get more of a groundswell of this kind of treatment of others happening, and of course, treatment of ourselves, I think it would be helpful.
Yes, thank you. Okay, Marvin, I've been promising that you're on. Let me give you just a little introduction, okay?
Sure.
He is Marvin Garvyn, is representing the Urantia book. He's semi-retired after 30 years in practice as a family therapist, and currently works as the executive director of the Interfaith Council of Southern Nevada. So we have interfaith councils on this from Port Angeles, Washington, to the Bay Area to Southern Nevada. That's pretty cool. He's been actively involved in interfaith activities for more than 30 years and has attended 5 conferences of the World Parliament of Religions. He completed a 2-year certificate of theological studies from the Graduate Theological Union in history and sociology of religion. He's led numerous workshops on psychology and religion over the past 30 years and is the author of Reaching High, the Psychology of Spiritual Living. Marvin considers himself incredibly lucky. 50 years ago, when he was 17 and barely sentient, at his high school job at one of the first metaphysical bookshops in Los Angeles, he stumbled upon the Urantia book. It has shaped his entire adult life from that day forward. He's president of the Family of God Fellowship, which is dedicated to helping people live their lives more fully in spiritual family relationship. Please, Marvin.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, maybe I'll just start off right where you left off, because for me, and what flows from the Urantia, what it claims to be Urantia revelation, as the central spiritual metaphor for understanding who we are and what we are part of, what reality is spiritual family, the family of God, really. And to me, that speaks profoundly and directly to what Dan was speaking about the nature of human anthropology. How do we self-conceptualize? What am I? What am I in reality? And what am I by my nature? And for me, this is very helpful in understanding this controversial topic of sin. I don't think that's the best way of understanding it, that term. the best way for me to understand it is that I'm a young and immature and incomplete spiritual child in a spiritual family with God as my loving, nurturing, challenging, and companioning spiritual parent, right? So I'm small, I'm little. So of course I'm incomplete, and of course I make mistakes, but God is growing me up. And I find that really satisfying and very, very helpful personally, and deeply satisfying emotionally in terms of this issue of my own fallibility, right? Of course I'm fallible. I'm little. And God made me incomplete and immature so I could grow up in intimate relationship and companionship with that presence of God deep inside me. And all these are some of the central perspectives that flow from the Urantia revelation. And I think that self-conception and that way of living in intimate relationship with God and helping us see our own fallibility and helping us to grow is absolutely essential to finding a deep sense of personal peace, because we have to accept our own nature, which is why I think the constant preoccupation in Christian circles with sin, but I think it's a poor and not an effective conceptualization these days in the modern world. I think the conception of immaturity, and I think that's true on a global level. So let me talk a little bit now about the global level from the perspective of the Urantia book. The Urantia book claims to be a major epical revelation. What does that word epical mean? Well, the conception, the universe conception that's portrayed in this 2,000-page book is that the universe is massively, massively populated with literally trillions of inhabited worlds with mortal civilizations like our own that are evolving, that are growing, that are at different stages of maturation, right? What they call the progressive mortal epochs. And that there are higher celestial beings that help in that process on all of these worlds, including our own, angelic beings, higher beings, and that they periodically engage in what's called epical revelation. They try and reveal and show higher truth so that the mortal species on these evolving worlds can make progress in their evolving relationship with God and in the wisdom of their world management, geopolitically, economically, culturally, every which way. So this is a grand adventure that's unfolding universe-wide, and it's happening here on our world. And if I was going to guess where we are in that developmental process, I would most put us in the metaphor akin to adolescence, right? We're discovering our own powers, but we're not very mature in our use of them. And we can be pretty destructive, even self-destructive. So with that as a little bit of background, I am going to share a screen, and I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to share a lot of material with you and then share a few more personal thoughts, and then we'll open to conversation again. Let me try and share screens here, see if I can do that effectively. Can everyone see that now?
Yes.
Okay, just going to move one thing around. So I'll just read this, and I'm going to read it quickly, so bear with me, please. The Urantia book is a over 2,000-page volume, first published in 1955, claims to be a major epical revelation of truth to our world, authored by higher celestial beings. It presents detailed information on the nature of God, our relationship with God, the universe and its trillions of inhabited worlds, the history and destiny of our world, the purpose of our lives, a very full and detailed description of the afterlife that awaits every one of us, as well as in part 4, an 800-page portrayal of the complete life and teachings of Jesus, hour by hour, week by week, his entire life. So here's a thought, and it's an interesting sort of overall thought on the nature of our current situation globally. Without God, without religion, scientific secularism can never coordinate its forces and harmonize its divergent and rivalrous interests, races, and nationalisms. This secular, and this, by the way, all of this material came through in the period of the 1930s, right? So it's written as of that era. This secularistic human society, notwithstanding its unparalleled materialistic achievement, is slowly disintegrating. The chief cohesive force resisting this disintegration of antagonism is nationalism. And nationalism is the chief barrier to world peace. So that's a theme that's going to play out in the passages out ahead. So I'm going to share three brief passages on what they call religious sovereignty and the nature of sovereignty and how it plays a part in peace and whether peace can prevail. And then we'll spend most of the rest of the time reading some passages on political sovereignty. Free will beings who regard themselves as equals, unless they mutually acknowledge themselves as subject to some super sovereignty, some higher power, some authority over and above themselves, sooner or later are tempted to try out their ability to gain power and authority over other persons and groups. It's part of human nature, the animal part of our nature. The concept of equality never brings peace except in the mutual recognition of some over-controlling influence of super sovereignty, sort of a higher authority or presence. Religious peace or brotherhood can never exist unless all religions are willing to completely divest themselves of all ecclesiastical authority over each other and fully surrender all concept of spiritual sovereignty. God alone is spirit sovereign. You cannot have equality among religions, religious liberty, without having religious wars, unless all religions consent to the transfer of all religious sovereignty to some superhuman level to God himself. And I want to pause here and say, you see the opposite of this principle in religious fundamentalism and religiously based wars, right? One religion saying our way is the right way and we will impose it upon you. You see the ideal, frankly, you see the early buddings of the ideal attitude of this in what I have experienced in the interfaith movement. What's happening right here? No one of us is saying my way is the right way. All of us are saying is there's a higher way, and we are all making our way toward that higher presence, and we all can learn and benefit from our relationships with each other and the rich sharing of our traditions as we make our way to this higher reality that we're all striving for, right? So that's the principle of sovereignty in relation to religious sovereignty and battles and wars, religiously based wars, which we still have, still plaguing us. So let me go back now and share the screen again, and we'll look at some of this same principle of sovereignty as it relates to political sovereignty. And then I'm going to share some thoughts about the current situation with Ukraine, Russia, and what's happening in the world globally and geopolitically. Urantia, by the way, is the name of our world in higher celestial circles within this body of revelation. War on Urantia will never end so long as nations cling to the elusive notions of unlimited national sovereignty. There are only two levels of relative sovereignty on an inhabited world: the spiritual free will of the individual mortal and the collective sovereignty of mankind or humankind as a whole. Between the level of the individual human being and the level of the total of mankind, all groupings and associations are relative, transitory, and of value only insofar as they enhance the welfare, well-being, and progress of the individual and the planetary grand total, a human being and all of humankind. And I'm going to ask you to forgive the male-oriented language. Again, this is from the 1930s, and so we've evolved a great deal in our language since then. Sovereignty is power, and it grows by organization. This growth of the organization of political power is good and proper, for it tends to encompass ever-widening segments of the total of humankind. But this same growth of political organizations creates a problem at every intervening stage between the initial and natural organization of political power, the family, and the final consummation of political growth, the government of all mankind, by all mankind, and for all mankind. Each new and forward evolution of political sovereignty is and has always been embarrassed and hampered by the scaffolding stages of the previous developments in political organization. And this is true because human loyalties, once mobilized, are very hard to change. The same loyalty which makes possible the evolution of the tribe makes difficult the evolution of the super tribe, the territorial state. And the same loyalty, patriotism, which makes possible the evolution of the territorial state, meaning nations, vastly complicates the evolutionary development of the government of all mankind. As sovereignty passes from smaller groups to larger groups, wars are lessened. That is, minor wars between smaller nations are lessened. But the potential for greater wars is increased as the nations wielding sovereignty become larger and larger. Presently, when all the world has been explored and occupied, when nations are few, strong, and powerful, when these great and supposedly sovereign nations come to touch borders, when only oceans separate them, then will the stage be set for major wars, worldwide conflicts. So-called sovereign nations cannot rub elbows without generating conflicts and eventuating wars. Urantia, our world, will not enjoy lasting peace until the so-called sovereign nations intelligently and fully surrender their sovereign powers into the hands of the brotherhood of men, all men and women, all humankind government. Internationalism, leagues of nations, and bear in mind, this was written before World War II and before the formation of the United Nations, which is still a fledgling attempt at these development of these structures. Worldwide confederations of nations will effectively prevent minor wars and acceptably control the smaller nations. But they will not prevent world wars nor control the 3, 4, or 5 most powerful governments. In the face of real conflicts, one of these world powers will withdraw from the League and declare war. You cannot prevent nations going to war as long as they remain infected with the delusional virus of national sovereignty. Internationalism is a step in the right direction, an international police force, and the United Nations has that. It has a small peace force, right? Will prevent many minor wars, but it will not be effective in preventing major wars, conflicts between the great military governments of Earth. As the number of truly sovereign nations, great powers decreases, so do both opportunity and the need for humankind government increase. When there are only a few really sovereign great powers, either they must embark on the life and death struggle for national imperial supremacy, or else by voluntary surrender of certain prerogatives of sovereignty, they must create the essential nucleus of supranational power, which will serve as the beginning of the real sovereignty of all humankind. And this is exactly where we are perched right now in history. Peace will not come to Urantia, our world, until every so-called sovereign nation surrenders its power to make war into the hands of a representative government of all mankind. Political sovereignty is innate with the peoples of the world. When all the peoples of Urantia create a world government, they have the right and the power to make such a government sovereign. And when such a representative or democratic world power controls the world's land, air, and naval forces, peace on earth and goodwill among men can prevail, but not until then. With scientific progress, wars are going to become more and more devastating until they become almost racially suicidal. And again, this was just preliminary to the development of nuclear weaponry that this was written. So it was very prophetic. How many world wars must be fought, and how many leagues of nations must fail before men and women will be willing to establish the government of humankind and begin to enjoy the blessings of permanent peace and thrive on the tranquility of goodwill, worldwide goodwill among men. Another world war will teach the so-called sovereign nations to form some sort of federation. thus creating the machinery for preventing small wars, wars between the lesser nations. But global wars will go on until the government of humankind is created. Global sovereignty will prevent global wars. Nothing else can. It is not a question of armaments. And bear with me, it's just a little more reading here. It is not a question of armaments or disarmament. If you take every form of modern mechanical armaments and all types of explosives away from strong nations, they will fight with fists, stones, and clubs as long as they cling to their delusions of the divine right of national sovereignty. War is not man's great and terrible disease. War is a symptom, a result. The real disease is the virus of national sovereignty. World peace cannot be maintained by treaties, diplomacy, foreign policies, alliances, balances of power, or any other type of makeshift juggling with the sovereignties of nationalism. World law must come into being and must be enforced by world government, the sovereignty of all humankind. The individual will enjoy far more liberty under world government. Today, the citizens of the great powers are taxed, regulated, and controlled almost oppressively. And much of this present interference with individual liberties will vanish when the national governments are willing to trustee their sovereignty as regards international affairs into the hands of global government. Because at that point, you won't have national armies and all of the taxation that goes with the need to support them. Under global government, and I'm coming to the end here, the national groups will be afforded a real opportunity to realize and enjoy the personal liberties of genuine democracy. The fallacy of unlimited national self-determination will be ended. With global regulation of money and trade will come the new era of worldwide peace. Soon may a global language evolve, and then there will be at least some hope of sometime having a global religion or religions with a global viewpoint, which is sort of what we have in the interfaith movement. And then lastly, there's a profound relationship between the spiritual peace and spiritual sovereignty of God in all of our lives that Dan was referring to so eloquently, and the geopolitical peace for our whole world. The political sovereignty of global representative government will bring lasting peace on earth, and the spiritual brotherhood, the spiritual family of all humankind will forever ensure goodwill among all men and women. And there is no other way whereby peace on earth and goodwill among men can be realized. So I want to thank you for bearing with me for this intense exposure to some of this material. And now I just want to make a couple of comments. We're good in timing. It's 3:06. We got almost a half hour for conversation. I want to make just a couple of comments about how this relates to our current situation with Ukraine and Russia. Something unprecedented is going on geopolitically in the history of our world. It's never happened before. You have one of the three major military superpowers of our world, and there are really three. There's United States / Europe, NATO, there's China, and there's Russia, right? All three major nuclear powers. One of those three is aggressing in a solitary fashion against a victim nation. Every other time in the history of the world, other nations would have banded together in various alliances and engaged in military response to that military aggression. That's not happening now. Under the leadership of the West, and I have some biases, pardon them, the global community, apart from a few exceptions, are lining up in unison to basically wage economic and industrial warfare in lieu of military warfare against that aggressor nation. And it's an experiment that is unfolding, and we will see where it ends up. But the kinds of structures that are evolving and cooperative alliances that are evolving to bring about this new type of solution to singular aggression on the part of an aggressor nation is unprecedented. It's never happened before. And that's because the world is having to function as a global community for the first time in history, and has the wherewithal, because of global intercommunication via the internet and global travel, has the wherewithal to function as a global community to respond to an aggressor and criminally acting nation. And we have had those, and we will continue to have them. But I think the world may be able to learn a lesson and develop structures that are key developments toward the eventual development of global structures economically and politically, and then eventually militarily, with the development of global government and a single police force for global self-management. That is the only way that we will get to global world peace. And the last thing I'll say is there's a profound relationship between what Dan spoke about and what I've sort of focused on, which is it's only as individuals find interior peace, live differently, treat each other differently, and self-conceptualize differently as individuals and as cultures. We see ourselves as part of something much larger and much more long-lasting that we're attempting to create here. As a species, we are attempting to mature and grow up toward our eventual destiny as a mature species. That's what we're in the middle of, is from my point of view. So I want to thank you for bearing with my long speech here. And Sarah, just open it up, and I can chair it, facilitate it, or you can. And just, I'd love to hear folks' thoughts in response to anything I've shared, and of course, also what Dan provided earlier for our thought.
So Marvin, why don't you go ahead and facilitate, and Dan too, and raise your hands. Well, Robert Esch has his hand up. Is that right? I finally figured out how the hand situation works. It goes up to that corner up there.
Yeah, and then the
5
way,
years to understand how that works.
if you want to figure out how to raise your hand, in that bottom band, you see where it says reactions. If you click on reactions, you'll see raise hand. And once your hand is raised, if you'd like to lower it, you can click on reactions again, and it gives you the option to lower your hand.
Thank you. The hand.
Marvin,
Yeah, Robert, go ahead.
just a quick question. I can see the need for a world government, and in that, I don't see where people would lose their identity, in the sense that Oregon and Washington still have an identity, but have agreed not to attack each other, even though we're a much better state. But when I look at the potentiality for a third world war and the devastation that would cause, I could see how that could lead to an awakening of humankind for the need of a global government. But barring that catastrophe, Marvin, do you see another way, or how we're going to move forward towards that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And you're right to articulate two ways, as I best understand it. One is a way of steady evolution, and the other is a way of intense conflict and 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. So in other words, you make progress, but you don't act wisely, and you regress, and you regroup, and then you try again. And we are right now dealing with that option, that choice geopolitically, because I do believe that we are actually in World War III right now. We are in an intense situation that could deteriorate into active military global warfare, but it is being prosecuted industrially and economically. But make no mistake about it, the world is acting cohesively to do battle with Russia. And very likely in 6 months to a year, Russia is likely to deteriorate to the point of no longer being a superpower and no longer being able to function industrially in any effective capacity, because no nation, much less superpower, can function in the modern world unless it is interlinked with the modern world cooperatively. That's what we've come to. And the leaders so far of the Western world are functioning wisely and with great discipline to wage warfare non-militarily, but warfare nevertheless. And if we're lucky and successful, we will emerge on the other side with the structures much more fully developed to evolve our way toward world government. But I think we're in the midst of a history-making crisis, and whether we act wisely and with spiritual inspiration or not is going to say whether we go the slow progressive route or whether we go the crisis, destruction, regression, and then regroup and go the other way route. But it's a great question. We're in the middle of it right now, which is amazing. It's, the Chinese character for crisis is, you've all heard this, made up of two characters, danger and opportunity. And here we are. So yeah, great question.
Go ahead, Channing.
Working hard to unmute there.
Where's the button?
Yeah, lower left, the microphone. There you go.
Okay.
Hey, sorry about that. Yeah, my goodness, this is such an amazing topic, and our committee was really excited about this question. It's so big, and I love the fact that Dan and you, Marvin, have approached it from the bottoms up and the tops down. And I love all the information that you both have given, And so coming back to what Leela talked about of oneness, I think about something that my father used to say before he passed away. He was a great student of human history and watching the world and studying the European Union as it was forming. And he said, the world will never come to peace until it's invaded from outer space. Now that was a joke in some ways, but who knows? Aliens could arrive and then we'd have a sci-fi movie and all that sort of thing in reality. But I think as in terms of oneness, I believe that the higher power, spirit, divine, is guiding us. We have free will, and as a humanity, we have grown over thousands of years. But we're at a crossroads now because the world has grown into a global community where people are interdependent, but they don't think they're interdependent. They think that they are independent of other people. So
that's the fallacy of national sovereignty.
Right.
And so we can do, one of us can do it ourselves, can't
exactly. And they will protect that identity, that individual identity, more than giving that up to cooperate. So I think, and I think we talked about this, that, the strife that we're seeing is also gate. As Leonard Cohen said, there are cracks everywhere. That's how the light gets in.
Very interesting.
That's how the light gets in. And you can see that in Ukraine. You can see the resilience, the courage, the leadership. And it was so surprising. It was so surprising, when Zelensky came out of nowhere and became this amazing hero. And so I think that there are a lot of things that are going on that if we just get away from the media a little bit and we really just observe the world, and coming from all of our religious backgrounds or non-religious backgrounds or spiritual backgrounds or non-spiritual or scientific, we have to look at the world as one. We have to look at the dynamic influences that are coming at the individual level that are encouraging us to change our consciousness. And we have to look at the global influence on societies in terms of moving towards cooperation.
Yeah, the two are intertwined profoundly.
So I see the whole thing is linked up, and I put that in Spirit's hands because I believe, as the Baha'i faith says, that humanity has evolved spiritually equally at the same time that we have evolved biologically. So I think
Yeah,
that's a really, really interesting concept about spiritual evolution and biological evolution. So I think these are some concepts of looking at the big picture in a much more integrated way.
well, you
Marilyn
shared
has her hand up.
yeah, you shared a lot of wisdom, and then we'll go to Marilyn and get to you in just a sec. And did you want to say something too, Stephen, or were you just applauding?
No, I actually wanted to mention
Okay,
that
yeah, well,
in the midst of what you're doing, Dan Sturtevant brought up the humility of kneeling down and asking for faith and hope and peace.
well, I think what everyone is sharing is so on target. Channing, I want to share a thought in response to what you did, and of course, you reminding us, Stephen, that without spiritual resources, we can't tap the wisdom we need to behave in a self-disciplined and far-seeing way in order to act wisely and with compassion and love and make the wise decisions. We have to do it in concert with God. There's no other way. But Channing, you brought up the interesting principle that if we have a common enemy just mean people who are separated can then unite to fight it, like an invader from outer space. Well, the irony is that we have met the common enemy, and he is us.
It does.
And the profound truth is, as we've evolved globally, we have created global size problems that only we acting as a global humanity can solve. We've created climate problems. We've created nuclear proliferation problems. We've created economic disparity issues that will destroy humanity if we do not act together as humanity to resolve them. But we are facing a number of common enemies that is forcing us to unite. What is going on right now is a case in point.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing before we go to Marilyn is, the power of this situation with Ukraine is it's almost an ancient biblical metaphor. It's David and Goliath, right? It's the little person who is brave and courageous standing up to the 20-foot bully, right? Who is unprincipled and full of pride and hubris, right? And that's another spiritual lesson that's unfolding here. Individual pride and self-aggrandizement, we must realize it'll lead us to nowhere but disaster. It's the well-being of the world as a whole, who we are together as humanity and spiritual family, that really must guide us going forward, or else we won't survive. We just won't make it. So Marilyn and then Judy.
Okay. Well, there was a couple of other things that came up as you were talking, Marvin, for me, and to do with some of the stuff I've been reading recently. And you mentioned that we are in World War III and that it's being fought by the West rather than actively militarily, although we're giving the supplies for that through industry and economics. And it's also being fought morally and culturally.
Yeah.
And there's quite a bit of information right now about something they call the swarm, which you may not have heard of. I hadn't heard of it, but it's something that our defense systems have been looking into since Iraq, and what happened there. And it's this whole thing that can happen without a parent leader that happens through social media.
Yeah.
And so Ukraine has been brilliant in how they're using that. An article I read today actually was an interview with their Ukraine's cabinet member for IT and social media. So them getting Elon Musk satellites in 2 days, that was not something that just happened. That was a long-term relationship that had been being built. And their intention was to be the Ukrainians' intention was to be able to be a real hub. And lots of the other stuff, them being able, they jammed the cell phones for the Russians by jamming that area code, the area codes that had to do with Russia. And, you know, so there was like all this stuff that's going on through this new technology of how do you defend yourself in the 21st century versus the 20th century.
Well, that's fascinating. I hadn't heard about that, but that idea of swarming, you know, one of the things that's happened is the largest group of hackers in the world, which are notoriously decentralized, right? These are individualists. They have come out and unanimously declared war on Russia through their hacking. And they didn't do that through any government telling them to do that. And what's playing out here, which is fascinating, is this is a huge global stage for values and morality to play out and for people en masse to choose, to make choices as to where they will put their energy, right? And it doesn't have to be centralized. People are making value choices. And Zelensky is brilliant. He's basically saying there's good and this is a good and evil drama that's unfolding. He's an actor, right? He knows this from history, and he's playing it fully to the hilt to fierce effect. You know, it's good versus evil, and the world is choosing, and Putin is not looking good. He's not looking like a character worthy of emulation. Even the Chinese are saying, how do we maintain an alliance with this in this situation? So there's a value drama playing out, and it's a spiritual drama of values.
Yeah,
but
and,
the idea,
and there is a concern. One of the concerns is whatever happens at whatever point of negotiations, that when there were just the superpowers and you didn't have these other forces like this swarming, or now you've got all the people to people, individual people that are giving money to Ukrainians or giving weapons or giving supplies through the internet, really, that they may not have a place to stop, and that they can go into extremes where there had been sort of rules of engagement of at a certain point, you match up what the forces are. So that's where the prayers and the spirituality and the forgiveness and the humbleness is really going to need to come in at the right time.
good point. Will, and then Bettina. And
Was-
do we have a hard stop at 3:30?
Well, I was just asking Will that. Will, can you address that?
We can go a little bit longer. We started a little later.
Okay.
That would be great. And I was just going to point out that, humanity's been through these times of not having a shared cosmology before. This happened during the first axial age, when a lot of world religions were trying to figure out how to help people live lives free under empires. So from 600 BCE to 600 CE, most of the religions of the world that most of us are members of were begun in this era where they were trying to figure out how to make peace between people living under an empire. We're in a very similar place. I think we're also in a similar place to about 500 years ago, when there was less of a shared conversation around what is life and how do we what is our place within it during the Protestant Reformation. And I think that the printing press was the disruptive technology then. The internet is the disruptive technology now, because we're able to read about Urantia and about cultures on the other side of the world and be exposed to other ideas that 100, 200 years ago we weren't able to be as exposed to. And because we're in this new axial age, we're even rethinking the golden rule, which came out of the first axial age. And almost every life philosophy and world religion during that first axial age had some form of treat others the way you want to be treated. Today, we're asking the question, how do we treat others the way they want to be treated? Because we have at our fingertips the ability to start to ask those questions and the invitation to actually ask them. You know, what is pronouns except asking someone how they wish to be treated?
Wonderful. Yeah, very, very good point. Very different conditions. I want to go to Bettina, but I realize I messed up. Judy, I think had
Yeah, I
something
think
she
Judy
wanted to
was
share.
in there.
Yeah, go ahead,
I,
Judy.
I was, Marvin, wanted to go back to your very simple statement about David versus Goliath. And having had the experience of knowing personally during my service in the Peace Corps in Ukraine and getting to know the people, living with the people on the street, in their apartments, shopping with them, interacting with them, getting to know their souls, their nature, their character. The only thing I can say at a spiritual level is that maybe it will be true that the meek shall inherit the earth.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, there's a humble heroism in that culture that we're seeing. Yeah. And it's wonderful that you're here. We can speak personally from your exposure, your living in that culture. Yeah, there's something very powerful going on as a spiritual drama that is unfolding for us here. I think everyone feels it. Everyone except those who are really numb to it. And you know, there are people who are numb to it, which is why we're in this problematic situation. Bettina and then Dan. Thank you, Judy.
My question is to ask for people who wouldn't be here. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't find it compatible, but it is a strong opinion being voiced, which is those who not only fear the idea of a global world order, but feel that the real battle, the final last hurrah battle, is against this kind of globalism.
Yeah.
And it's a shockingly high number of people who see that, and a number of the spin-off conspiracies. And I would optimistically love to think that we are at a nexus of a global community that economically and essentially, well, it's violent, but not like direct bombing, economic sanctions and all of that. I agree very much with what you said, but I know there's a significant population that abhor that idea.
Well, you're absolutely correct. And if you take the essence of the passages that I tried to share, if you get underneath it, what they feel is that their safety, their security, their entire sense of well-being is vested in their national identity. That's where they will be okay.
Well, I would say in their religious identity, because a great lot of
religious identity, yeah, either one or both. You know, where they're married up together, and it's a mistaken assumption. We will all suffer together until we embrace a larger self-identity. That's why it goes back to the anthropological issue that Dan was raising. Who are we? What am I? Am I an American? Am I a Russian or a Chinese or an African or a Cuban? Or am I a child of God, part of a global community, and our ultimate welfare and our sense of security can only come now because of our globalization technologically. The only way we will all be secure and safe from global climate change and nuclear horror, the horror of nuclear war. The only ways we will be safe is to find a new and higher identity, a more encompassing identity as a global spiritual humanity together. And that's the lesson here. It's a misunderstanding to see national sovereignty as a savior, and it won't do anymore. It won't function. Our problems are too big. So yeah, absolutely. But it's a very real issue that's playing out within our countries and globally right now. And we'll see if we can get across that barrier. Dan and then Ruth.
I just wanted to add a couple of things. Talking about a sort of a single global government, I do think that so many people would object to this that it might be impossible, but a lot of people don't realize that already we have had for the last 30 years a relatively successful experiment in this kind of thing, which is called the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
It has not been perfect, but there's not a single government over those 27 nations, but there is a commitment to cooperation. And at the same time, national identity isn't necessarily being sacrificed for that. It's been remarkably successful. And so I hold that out as a hope. I really do. Of course, the thing that has helped band them together was, of course, the horrors that they experienced in World War II,
Yeah.
but whatever it takes. The other thing I wanted to add, Marvin, you said quite correctly, or at least I agree with it, that a huge disruptor was right around the time of the Reformation was the printing press, because of the fact that it made so much information that had not been available to other than elites. It made it available. The internet has been compared to that, but we're running into a problem. It is not the availability of information that the internet offers, but the absolute surfeit of information, the overwhelm of information. There is too much of it for us even to comprehend, and it actually has been a force of chaos. So it's something that we're maturing to be able to use helpfully.
Oh, exactly. What does it mean that information is ubiquitous and readily available every instant all over the globe?
And conflicting information.
And what it sets up is what we've been dealing with is this whole issue of informational relativism. What's true? We don't know what's true. So you're right, it's created challenges, but it's also created opportunities. And the other major technological development is near instantaneous global travel.
Yeah.
Which dates from the 1950s with global airlines. And look at what's being done in vis-a-vis Russia, right? The global community is saying, if you can't play by the new global rules, right, we will withdraw your participation as a global participant. We will no longer send you the parts that can keep your airlines viable and your communication technologies viable, and you can retreat back into the Middle Ages if you can't play by the rules. So, I mean, all this stuff is in play, massively in play, in today's world. Go ahead, Ruth, and we'll see how many more people, but at some point we probably will want to move toward a closure.
Yeah, I think probably after Ruth, there are still people that I would love to hear from, but anyway, go ahead, Ruth.
So my question is about the supranatural power, economic power of capitalism.
You mean supranational?
Supranational, yes, that's what I'm trying to say. Power of capitalism. Where does that come into play with it seems larger and even more powerful?
That's another whole topic.
But it's related. There are issues of managed economic organization versus free market issues. These are all issues we're struggling with. And should there be governors on free market dynamics, or should they run pell-mell? So these are all major ethical, and they take a lot of wisdom, and they're questions we're wrestling with right now. But I think it's fascinating that under the leadership of the US, not only the Western world, which is Europe and the United States, but many other countries around the world that are allied with that are coming together and basically saying, if you can't play by the rules, you will not benefit from being a member of the evolving global community, and you will retrogress, because no nation can now progress and persist as a modern nation without being a viable member of the global community. And we've never been there before. This is the first time in history where that dynamic is in play. And I'll share with you one other passage. I'm just going to pop it in the chat box. And for me, it caps up much of what we've been talking about. And I'll just share it with you. And then maybe we'll move to a conclusion. For when culture advances over fast, when material achievement outruns the evolution of worship wisdom, then does civilization contain within itself the seeds of retrogression. And unless buttressed by the swift augmentation of experiential wisdom, such human societies will recede from high but premature levels of attainment, and the dark ages of the interregnum of wisdom will bear witness to the inexorable restoration of the imbalance between self-liberty and self-control. This is exactly what's playing out, I think, in Russia. I think, and it's not the Russian people. The Russian people are rich and a very wise people, but that leadership is filled with a sense of hubris, of self-pride and power. And it's not a spiritually flavorful a set of actions or leadership. And I think, pride leads to a great fall. And we'll see what happens in the next year. But I think the lessons will be profound in the way Ukraine is behaving, the way Russia is behaving in the world, the way the world community, through hopefully some restrained and wise leadership, is responding to this challenge. We are in tremendously portentous times, I think. So I want to say this has been an amazing conversation. And Dan, you started us off right with a foundation of spiritual peace and our own self-conceptualization. And we've sort of gone from there all over the place. And so I want to thank you, Sarah, for just a great and very rich discourse. Wonderful.
I just had the privilege of sitting and listening to all of you. The thing that I'm taking away from it is one of the last things you said, Marvin: if you cannot play by the rules, you are out. And I've worked with children, young children, and that's the first thing kids learn. If you don't play by the rules, you're out.
So
and that's what's happening.
are we suggesting that Putin needs to take a time out?
Hey.
That, as the final word, maybe that's exactly what's going on here, is the world is saying, you need to spend some time in the corner.
Well, fortunately, they don't do that anymore. But, children are isolated by their group if they don't, and if they don't play by the rules. Everybody doesn't like that. It's too confusing. And it turns out bad.
Well,
so
maybe we can fittingly, it would be nice to take a moment to end off with a little bit of prayer, you think?
Yeah, just a quiet or?
Yeah, a little quiet, and I'll be glad to share a thought.
You go ahead and pray. Let's have
so let's
1 minute.
Why don't we take a moment and get settled, get centered in God's presence with us and within us and among us, and pray especially for the people of Ukraine. Bless them, help them be sustained spiritually. Let's take a moment in quiet, and then I'll share a little closing prayer. A wonderful God who we understand in so many different ways: higher presence, higher reality, higher truth, higher beauty and goodness. We pray from the depths of our heart for our world, and in particular for the Ukrainian people and the Russian people, but for all of us, that we might hew closely to you, we might cleave closely to you, inwardly and collectively, culturally, that we might be inspired, uplifted, so that we can act with wisdom and grow and build a world for our children and our children's children that can finally find that peace which passes all understanding. Amen.
Amen. Sarah, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Reverend Dan and Marvin, for your well thought out and poignant and inspirational presentations. And thank each one of you who have participated, even those of you whose voices we did not hear. I feel like you were definitely participating. You're here. And if you're here, you're participating. So thank you, especially to Will McGarvey for hosting our Zoom, and to each of you. Next month, can't quite remember the date, but it's, you know, the third Monday, Bettina, who will represent North American Interfaith Council, and Bettina's on with us today, who represents North American Interfaith Network. Is that right, Bettina? I think I got that right. She'll be on, and we'll have Rabbi Perlmutter on with us next time, and look forward to more in depth, more of everything. Thank you, each one of you.
Thank you, Sarah, for being our ringleader.
Yes.
And it does feel like that sometimes, but I work with this wonderful committee, Sunshine and Ruth and Channing. Without
good
them,
group.
I would not be in the ring at all, I'll tell you.
Well, thank you all.
And thank you, Marvin. Thank you, Dan.
Yes, Marvin, thanks so much. So much, too much to think about, you know.
Oh,
my
yeah.
brain's
It
exploding.
was great.
That's
Great.
Marvin.
Yeah.
No, but all really wonderful, wonderful thoughts. We were way out there today.